I honestly didn't ever think I'd be saying this, but Dori is really underrated. Like, really, really underrated. At least when you have her C6, Dori becomes a very competent electro driver. And I'm going to show you throughout this video that she is actually a worthy competitor to the other electro on-fielders in the game, and actually has pros over some of them. And if you like her, you can build her as your electro of choice and use her instead of Sino or instead of Yaimiko. She can replace Kuki on your account. You don't have to build Kaching. You don't need Beidou. You can just use Dori? This can't be right. Isn't Dori supposed to be trash? Welcome to Jello Impact, where I've built every single character and I've tested Dori to find out that she's actually kind of good so that you don't have to, because I know no one wants to build this character. Dori, at least with her C6, is an on-field electro healer, DPS, driver, and electro applicator. She does surprisingly good healing, surprisingly good damage, and has surprisingly good electro application, and is actually surprisingly fun to play. You can tell this video is going differently than I thought it was. I'm not going to give you many tips before C6. If you want to use her, you can as like an electro healer, applicator, energy regenerator, etc. But her C6 is what gives her an electro infusion, which actually allows her to be an on-field driver and do all the roles that I've been talking about her doing. So this video is mostly for people who happen to have her C6, because without it, her normal attacks do not do any electro, and so she's generally just a worse version of Kuki that you'd never really bother using, although you can use her instead. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about her kit first. Her skill sends out a little lamp and does some electro damage, but her skill becomes much more important in Constellation 6, which we'll talk about, and it does track to nearby opponents and does additional electro damage. That's really nice for applying electro, for hyper blooms, for aggravates, etc. It doesn't have that good of multipliers, and it has a fairly long cooldown, but that's also addressed by Constellations. Her burst restores HP to the active character, regenerates energy for the active character, and applies electro to the active character. It also applies electro on the ring or on the line between you and the opponent, and deals electro damage every 0.4 seconds, so that can also proc aggravates, hyper blooms, etc. After proccing a reaction, her passive decreases her skill cooldown, which is really, really useful. This is a very important passive for her kit, up to 1 second every 3 seconds. So since this has a 9-second cooldown, you can effectively decrease it by up to 3 seconds, which means you can pretty comfortably get 3 skills per rotation instead of 2, which again will be very important when we look at the Constellations. Her other passive gives her more ER, which is good because her burst has a pretty expensive 80 cost, very expensive. Her Constellations, she is a character who is Constellation locked. So Constellation 1 gives you more electro application and damage from her skill. C2 gives you extra damage as well. C3 is a talent upgrade, which gives you more healing and more damage. C4 gives you more healing and more energy when your healing and energy is low. C5 more levels, and C6, very, very important. After you use her skill, she gains an electro infusion and team-wide healing, which is, both of these are absolutely critical for her to actually be a good character. So I really, really would not recommend building Dori pre-C6, but once you have C6, she becomes a very competent electro character. So let's talk about her teams. Number 1 is her double hydro hyper bloom team, and I think that this is really cool that she fulfills this role, because some people don't have a Kuki, they want to build a hyper bloom team, and you've wished on banners and now you have a C6 Dori, and it is what it is. So what are you gonna do? Oh, you can't even see her because I'm blocking her. So she has both advantages and disadvantages over Kuki. Her big advantage is that she actually heals the full team, which makes running Farina hyper bloom teams actually viable. And because Nahida does good damage on this team, because Yelan does good damage, because Farina herself, and because Dori herself also does good damage on this team, you can either run a straight hyper bloom or a quick bloom Dori. This team actually has a huge amount of synergy. The disadvantage over Kuki is that you do have to run Dori on field, whereas Kuki you can run someone else. But honestly, this trade-off is not that bad, because you are again healing the whole team, allowing you to build Yelan and Nahida for DPS. And overall, I mean, this team is just good, right? Like, obviously it's good. You're using 3 of the most broken characters of all time, and you're also using an electro character to proc one of the most broken reactions in the game. So I can understand if you're not a Dori believer after watching this video. But what if I told you that Dori made electro charge good as well? This is easily my favorite electro charge team that we have right now, because Farina is applying AoE Hydro, Fischl is doing damage and being buffed by Farina, Cosmo is providing damage bonus in grouping, and Dori is doing healing, which makes it one of the most comfy electrocharge teams because a lot of electrocharge teams don't have a ton of healing. If you think about this as Kokomi, it's sort of like Kokomi electrocharge, but I think this feels a little bit better. I don't know if Dori like does more damage than Kokomi, or well, it feels better to me actually. My Kokomi is underbuilt for damage, so that's actually not a fair comparison. I would guess it feels quite similar overall, but that's pretty impressive. Now, what else? What if you don't want to use Farina? Is Dori, because you might say to yourself, well, Jello, you're just biased because Dori's kind of sitting on a little Jello, and you may be right, but you're also wrong because she works great on an aggravate team as well that doesn't use Farina, that you just use Fischl, Nahida, and Kazuha. And this is mind-blowing how good this team actually is. And the reason why it's so good is because you can run Nahida while still having a healer. And Dori provides tons of electro app through her burst, through her skill, and through her electro infusion that this team feels amazing. It is one of the best feeling aggravate teams. It is better than the Keqing team. I'm sorry, Keqing mains. I'm sorry myself. I hate myself for saying this. I hate myself for making this video. I now have to say that Dori is a better character than Keqing. I hate it. I hate it here. I'm not having fun. I still don't think that Dori is as better than Yaimiko. I don't think she's quite on this level because Yaimiko, the damage that she provides is just higher. But the fact that you can run Nahida on a damage build, Fischl on a damage build, Dori on a damage build, and Kazuha getting really good aggravate damage, like this team's damage profile is just very, very good. And it's good in AoE and in single target. And I'm honestly so surprised. Like, I did not expect this team to be so good. You can also run Plunge Dori. Ironically, you might have been thinking that this would have been one of the better teams. I actually didn't like this at all. Maybe I was using it wrong. It's really awkward to get Electro Swirls that actually last a long time. I think I need to try it again. Hold up. So yeah, I tested out the Plunge team, started with the rotation of Dori's Burst and then Farina because I wanted to get some Electro and Hydro, and then I swirled the Shenyan and then did Nahida. I also tried it where I did Nahida first and didn't worry about the swirls. Either way, it was not my favorite Dori team. I just prefer to do either the Aggravate or the double or the Electro or the double Hydro, Hyper Bloom, or the Electrocharge. Any of the other ones I prefer to the Plunge. I didn't try Bennett Plunge, but I'm sure it works. Damn, there's one more that I didn't try. You can use all the best characters all together and do the razor thing. All right, we'll try this. I'm just kidding. I don't want to switch all the artifacts around, but you know it's going to work. You know you can do the Thundering Furry Razor with Dori instead. You can either use Farina and do a hybrid build, or you can do something like Xingqiu or Yelan for more Hydro App for more blooms. The problem I always have with these teams is just taking away your Bennett and Nahida, and especially if you're using Farina, it's just taking away way too many high value characters that are backbones of different teams and leaving really nothing for your other team. It's more of a problem if you're using Farina, less of a problem if you're using Xingqiu, because then you can at least use Farina Yelan on the other side. But I digress. These are the Dori teams, and honestly, that's a really good spread. So let's talk about her build guide, and then we'll talk about her value and versus others. What about Chevreuse teams? Can you do a Dori Chevreuse team? Oh, don't make me do this again. No, because Chevreuse is a healer herself, so we'll not do the Chevreuse today. But you could probably also run her in a Chevreuse team. What would you run her in if you did? Yeah, because you've got Bennett, you've got Xiangling. You could do Xiangling. It'd be kind of like the Yai stuff. You could even do Yai. You could do Fischl. I think this might be a pretty decent option if you don't have C6 Chevreuse and she's not healing fully and you don't want to use Bennett and something like this. Although then you're not having as much energy for Xiangling. Let me know in the comments if you've done Dori Chevreuse, if you thought it was good. Fine, I'll try it. Be right back. Okay, I just got back from trying this team. It was actually pretty good. It was pretty good. Not bad. Not as good as the Yai or Raiden teams, but totally an acceptable variant and more comfy healing wise. Like, you can take a ton of damage, and you know, Chevreuse isn't like the most incredible healer, but if you're using Dori, obviously you're doing more healing than you were before. It is a bit of like lack of role consolidation, because ideally you do build your Chevreuse with enough healing that you can run a more damaging unit. So Dori's role consolidation isn't as good on this team, but it still is serviceable if you want to run a Chevreuse team and you want to run Dori. It's still got good power. Dori has a pretty similar build tips to other Electro characters. You want to 90 her, extremely important for all of the teams I mentioned, except maybe the Electrocharge one. You could get away with 80, but otherwise has to be 90. For talents, mine are 777. Obviously, if you're going to be maining Dori and using her a lot, 8 is the most efficient place to stop. 8 is kind of where I like my Aggravate and Hyper Bloom or Hyper whatever characters to be if you want to be resin efficient, but you can take them up to 9 if you want to get the most damage possible. useful. Her multipliers are decent, but they're not crazy. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to be using her as a damage dealer, you might as well level them up to at least 8. For weapons, once again, this is a C6 Dori build guide. I don't really advise anyone to use her pre-C6. If you are going to use her pre-6, you can go with Fav or Sack, and that's going to be totally fine as like your off-field budget cope kooky. But the thing is, to use her as a budget cope kooky, you still need to level her to 90. So you might as well just wait until you've got her actually leveled up. And then once she's, I think your best free to play is going to be the mailed flower, because this will give you lots of elemental mastery for your hyper. I used her on Beacon. I think that's sort of just your general best option. She gets attack and she gets crit rate, you know, pretty solid option. Serpent Spine's gonna be solid, but you are probably gonna take damage on this team, so not too recommended. You could use something that has ER, but I didn't feel like I needed the ER. Between her energy regeneration and you're using her on field, I found like I had enough ER, so I don't really recommend any ER stuffs. Mostly I'm just gonna run Beacon or Redhorn for 5 stars, Serpent Spine, Mailed Flower for 4 stars, and then Rain Slasher. It's also going to be good actually because your opponents are going to be affected by Hydro or Electro a huge amount of the time. So actually, like, yeah, it does have a high base attack, but Rain Slasher is going to be a really good option too. For fully free to play, probably the Fontaine Craftable is going to be your best bet. For artifacts, obviously, if you're using her with Farina, the Marishise Hunter is going to be your best. If you're doing full EM, then Flowers of Paradise Lost or Gilded Dreams. I personally like the hybrid the most myself, but those are fine too. If you're doing Electrocharge without Farina, which I don't really recommend as much because you get a lot of damage from Farina. But if you do, you know, Aggravate or something like that without Farina, I ended up, you know what's crazy? I actually didn't switch off my Marishise Hunter for my Aggravate Dori, and she still did so well. So yeah, you know, 2-piece Thundering Fury, even 4-piece wait, 4-piece Thundering Fury, that's way better because it's going to reduce your skill cooldown and give you more uptime on your skill. Yeah, that's a really good idea. I should have thought of that before I tested it. This is the thing about blazing a trail with a character that I didn't see any guides for. Well, to be fair, I didn't really research it. This is all me. But 2-piece Thundering Fury, 2-piece attack, 4-piece Thundering Fury. Thundering Fury is going to be a great option. 2-piece is a great option. Thunder Soother, I don't recommend because it's not that consistent and the 2-piece is not very good. And yeah, you can also do 2-piece EM, 2-piece attack, 2-piece Electro. It doesn't have to be 2-piece attack. So yeah, Sands, EM Sands pretty much always, unless you're in Electrocharge, and then you can go for attack Sands. Yeah, her healing is based off of her HP, but her damage is based on her attack, and I find she did heal enough just focusing on attack, so not too worried about the HP. She has a pretty high base HP, and you get a bit of HP from the Hydro Resonance if you are running around that type of team, so, but even without that, I was personally fine. For Goblet, if you're playing with Farina, you can go Electro or you can go EM. EM might even be optimal if you're doing proccing blooms and things like that, and then obviously crit rate or crit damage for the mask. Substats, crit rate, crit damage, EM. I personally didn't really need any ER. I had a little bit of ER. How much ER did I have? I actually did have about 130 ER, and I found that I was mostly just barely fine, so I would aim for about 125 to 135 for Dori's ER. Depending, of course, on how many fav and things you have on the team. I know people often want a stat line for crit. The trouble with that is that it's hard to, it depends on like the weapon you're using, if it's a crit weapon or not, and how much crit it gives you, how much other stats. So I don't know, I'll have to think more about what I want to say for recommendations for the actual stat line, but yeah, I'll have to think about what I want to recommend for that. You can check out my artifact guides. I have a bunch of videos where I've talked about it a fair bit. And my recent artifact secrets video, I talk about that crit value thing as well. For gameplay and tips, the only thing I want to talk about is two things. Her optimal combos, because after you use her skill, she gets her Electro Infusion, but her third normal attack is really, really slow. So here's the thing. What you want to do, I think, ideally, if you have the stamina, is first use your skill, normal attack cancel, normal attack cancel. That allows you to have 4 normal attacks that are Electro Infused. If you don't do the dash cancel, you get the third hit, and then by the time you start a new hit, you don't have your infusion anymore, which is not great. So, you know, by doing this, the third one is infused and then the next one is not. So that's, yeah, it's kind of a problem only having 3 attacks, whereas if you do a normal attack, dash, normal attack, then you actually get 4 attacks. So I highly recommend that combo. I can't promise you I actually did that combo all the time when I was actually in the Abyss, because I am a masher at heart, but that is what you want to do. And it is a relatively tight window. If you miss the dash after the second normal attack, then you will lose your infusion. And after you do, I will say this, I often stayed on field for no reason, but if your cooldown is not yet reset and you finished your electro infusion, you might as well swap off and, you know, refresh your Kazuha or do something else, or refresh your Nahida, because there's really no point in staying on if your infusion is up, but it is a lot. You do get a lot of damage and electro application from that infusion. So yeah, these sorts of things will continue to be optimized if anyone ends up trying to play Dori. You also can swap cancel, so you can do that and then swap. So you don't have to dash cancel your second swap, or your second attack. You can swap cancel instead of dashing, so that you don't waste stamina if that's an issue. I didn't find it that much of an issue because you're not charge attacking. You also could charge attack, I guess, right? Is that, wait, is charge attacking just better? I forgot that Claymore charge attacks exist. Okay. It might be that there is a place to charge. I was just thinking about it for a second. There is a place to charge attack. It just doesn't last for very long. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you're using Yelan or Fischl, normal attacking is going to be better, because you're going to want to proc her Fischl's C6 and proc Yelan's Rain Swords or Xingqiu's Rain Swords or whatever. If you're using Farina, there is an argument to be made for the charge attack. It's possible that that could be better. Bigger AoE too. Funnier. Pretty funny. For value and power level, how does Dori stack up versus other characters? Where is her overall value? She has like fine value if you happen to have her C6 already. Building her versus other Electros allows you to make your teams much more flexible, to be honest. Like, I like Lisa a lot. Lisa's really good. Where is she? As a free-to-play aggravate driver, but she restricts you to using, you know, Baiju or Kirara or Yao Yao as your Dendro. Whereas if you're using Dori, you can use Nahida as your Dendro. I also think that Dori allows you to work with Farina better as a healer. Like, Dori is, like, if you have a Farina and you want to build a Farina team, like Farina Electro Charge, Farina Double Hydro Hyper Bloom, these are things that other Electros can't do. Kuki can't do this the same way because she can't full heal the team. She requires your Nahida run Prototype Amber, right? If you don't have Baiju, then you're out of luck for Sino, and Dori's just like gonna outclass Sino if you don't have Baiju. Dori is more flexible than Sino. Dori is more flexible than Yai. Yai also requires you to have a defensive option as well. Here's the thing. The driver role for Farina teams, or not Farina teams, for Electro characters, the driver role is one of the least important parts because Fischl is such a good off-field character. And because Kaz was such a good off-field character, and because Nahida is such a good off-field character. So the on-fielder ends up being just a driver for Fischl, something to do with your team to drive Fischl while Kazuha's skills on cooldown or whatever it may be. Dori allows you to roll consolidate healing. She also allows you to, you know, heal for Farina on Farina teams. So I would say her value is probably honestly higher than all other Electro on-fielders except for Raiden, because Raiden has other options that are different, like Chevrus and stuff like that. Like, I don't think the ceiling is as high as Yai, but I do think the ceiling is probably higher than Keqing. I probably Sino's best team, his ceiling is higher because he just does more damage, like, and it is. But Dori has more teams and they're more comfortable for probably most people. She has more value than Yai. So honestly, Dori's pretty high. And where would I put her power level? It's way higher than when it used to be. I mean, so I think there's the S tier characters like Farina. There's the second best characters like Navia, and Dori is probably in the next tier down. Probably. For power, she might be one more down because I have a lot of tiers on my tier list these days. I don't know if Yai, I don't know, maybe she is just one tier. Yeah, maybe she is just one tier down. Like, I think, like, if you think about Noelle, right? People are really loving Noelle right now. Dori's way better than Noelle. Like, way better. It's not even close. Because Electro is just such a more valuable element than Geo, and there's so much more that you can do with Dori than Noelle. So whatever tier you think Noelle is, Dori is at least 1 tier higher. So that's what I think of her value and power level, and if you disagree with me, build your Dori and prove me wrong. I will say though, I don't like recommend you go out and build your Dori, because this is not, you know, I'm talking about a tier 2 character, right? Whereas Furina's tier 0, Navia's tier 1, Dori's tier 2. This is not a must pull character, right? Don't let the fact that I'm talking up her positives like tell you that you need to build your Dori or that you should build your Dori. It's just like she's objectively pretty strong and pretty good and has a lot of teams and isn't even tied to Furina. There's different options that you can do. And she enables a lot of very powerful characters to function by being an on-field healer. I didn't know on-field healer is a role that I wanted, but on-field healer and damage dealer is sort of a very unique spot for a character to be in, and I think we can move into her future prospects now. And finally for Overworld, I don't think Dori is that good in the Overworld. Her burst, her healing being tied to her burst is not great, but if you put her on Fav, then it's probably fine. And she does mine because she's a Claymore, but she's also a small body type, so her running kind of not so great. So I wouldn't say she's a crazy Overworld character, and she definitely is one of the more annoying voice lines, at least for me. But yeah, those are my overall thoughts on Dori. She's annoyingly good, and you shouldn't probably build her because you probably don't like the look of her, and there's probably lots of better options, or not better, but lots of other options that you can use. But if you haven't built an Electro character yet, she just might be the best role consolidation for you. Sadly, crazily, I don't know. Am I going crazy? Has Genshin Impact turned me crazy?